Hey everyone, welcome to a very special little production that me and Tom have put together here today, where we're going to be talking all about very interesting aviation and other fascinating projects in the world of sort of technology and machines and all things cool like that. So if you didn't already know, my name is Nick. I am the creator of Found and Explained, and before that I was an aviation journalist traveling the world doing flight reviews and investigating all the latest developments in aerospace technology. And then my partner here on the podcast today is Tom, who I'll let introduce himself.
So hello everybody, I'm Tom. Like we said, I'm a mechanical and systems engineer by day, and by night I'm a YouTube freelancer. I actually used to work for Mustard channel. You guys might know if you're fans of Found and Explained. I did a lot of research and writing for those kind of videos, so odds are good that you might have seen one of my productions. But yeah, real excited to join Nick here, and we, like he said, we're gonna be touching on all topics, aviation and technology. Should be a good time.
So take this all with a grain of salt. This is probably both our first time doing a production of this sort of scale and coming together like that. I know you may have seen a lot of sort of whiz-bang productions online. Maybe some people have got $1 million studio, but literally we're doing this here in our homes with just whatever we have on hand. In fact, I believe that, Tom, you're running your webcam through your iPhone in order to get...
I am. It's the closest camera I had was the phone in my pocket, and that's what we're going with.
All right, so yeah, this is going to be a more sort of fly-on-the-wall conversation as we investigate various different topics. And Tom, did you want to tell us about the topic today?
Right, so today I wanted to touch on eVTOLs and sort of the story around that. There's a lot of noise about what company is doing what project and that kind of thing. So we're going to touch a little bit on the science, the technology, and the stories that we can tell about what we can expect from this industry and what we can... sort of hope to see in the future, and maybe even debunk some of the myths that might get thrown around in there as if they were just as much science. But should be an interesting conversation, and we always hope you guys enjoy it.
And this is actually like sort of breaking news in a way, because wasn't there a company that several airlines have started to invest in? Sort of technology. I believe it was in London, and they were sort of doing, I think it was Virgin Atlantic is planning to build several of these sort of electric sort of city hopper aircraft to fly around the city to supplement their bigger routes. But that's something that I can bring up later in the podcast. Something for you to look forward to. And be sure to stay till the very end for all those Found and Explained subscribers, because I've got a bit of a sneak peek of a future video coming right up.
So first of all, a little bit of background on eVTOLs and sort of the value proposition that these guys bring. So this is a graphic put together by Uber. And if you can see here, these are the efficiency curves of different modes of transportation. We're comparing the top three on the left. Those are the cars. Say, for example, your average run-of-the-mill Uber ride. And on the right middle side, you see what these eVTOLs promise to be. So at a certain speed range, it makes way more sense from an energy efficiency point of view to take to the sky. So if you're using energy to move tires on ground, you can only go so fast before both wind resistance and rolling resistance get in your way. So at the sweet spot of 125 miles an hour and much faster, we can see that it definitely makes more sense to use energy in a VTOL configuration than in an automobile configuration, a typical road and tire setup.
That's insane. So you're telling me that VTOLs, when you get up to 125 miles per hour, are more efficient than a car?
And it's that rolling resistance thing. It's you're using the rubber against the road. At a certain point, you get so fast, and that gets so inefficient. The tires warm up too fast. It just makes way more sense to glide through the air and use that air resistance to your advantage for lift.
That's incredible. Okay, so now it makes sense why so many companies are sort of forwarding this thing. It's not so much that it's just a playground for rich billionaires, because after all, they can already get a helicopter. But to have a VTOL... that's just crazy. That I don't believe that. Anyway, go on.
And that's the thing. The market is competing right now against helicopters. Helicopters are famously horribly inefficient machines. You see how much noise those things make. See how much just downwash those things create. You know, if you've ever tried getting on and off a helicopter, it's like that has an engine running at full blast. You know how uncomfortable this thing is, right? Think all the noise and all the downwash. That's energy getting wasted. That's energy not being used to move forward or lift whatever cargo you're carrying. And then if you think about it, it keeps doing that throughout its journey. So for a transport purpose, the helicopter keeps making all that noise and keeps throwing all that downwash of air down as opposed to forward, right? You know, an airplane, sort of like a jet, is way more efficient in the sense that it's only pushing forward and letting the air lift it up using wings. The helicopter is lifting itself up every step of the way. So it's horrifyingly inefficient. If you could do this electrically, and if you could also mess around, as we'll see with a few of examples later, if you get to mess around with the configuration of your engines and your power plant, then there's a lot of room for improvement. And there's a lot of room you can find a lot of efficiency gains, which will, in theory, sort of help you play around with the powertrain and the energy storage side of things.
Wow, so helicopter technology is not as efficient as these VTOL concepts that we're talking about today.
Yeah, from an energy efficiency point of view, they're not. Of course, there's so many other considerations. Like there's the gravimetric energy density of just gasoline. If you could technically keep scaling up helicopters with more and more gas tanks, and they'll just last longer in the air. And manufacturing too. We already know how to make turbines. So the same turbines that run a turboprop, you put that on top of a helicopter and put a big rotor on it. You basically got a turboprop that is just pointing upwards, and that's your helicopter. So we already know how to make a lot of those engines.
Okay. So are there any other advantages that these electric VTOL aircraft have, just apart from competing against cars?
It's a real infrastructure question, really, because you could take advantage of, say, eVTOL charging infrastructure, and now you're charging your vertical takeoff and landing machine as opposed to filling it up with gas. And that it's not so much an advantage or disadvantage as it is just different infrastructure that you need them. Say, for example, we could explore capacitors as opposed to batteries, or we'll touch on a few other examples for energy storage. But yeah, it's a different infrastructure. It brings different opportunities, and it's a different market. And helicopters are things that are the people that should be watching out.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the helicopter market's been put on notice because of these concepts.
If you think about it, the helicopter market, it's like 80 to 90% hover missions, which is to say when you take off and land from the very same place. So it's either like news helicopters are just recording, or for camera purposes, for surveillance purposes, for military purposes. It's very few exceptions where helicopters are actually used on transport missions, where they're supposed to take off from point A and land at point B. And then it'll just be way more efficient to take off and land from an eVTOL perspective, because electric motors will be so much more efficient and they'll make so much less noise, and you could use them in a city, whereas helicopters are awful. Let's say, for example, New York City, Manhattan, they won't let you land on a Manhattan on a Manhattan rooftop anymore. It proved to be way too much of a nuisance, and nobody cared to have these helicopters going all over all above your head and making all this noise. So eVTOLs certainly do hold that promise. They're definitely talking about, hey man, this brand new technology means it's much more than just green solutions to aerial transport. It's our infrastructure could look a lot different. Our cities could look a lot different, and just the possibility of mobility looks very different.
So this is actually like a huge game changer in terms of city design. Like, this could change the way we travel. It's not just some sort of flying car sort of futuristic idea.
It could change the very word city. It could change what we mean by city or by a metro area. Say, for example, today, cities like Sao Paulo or very Los Angeles, very big sprawled out cities that are either suburban or semi-urban in any sense, those metro areas, they're pretty much married to cars, in that they sprawl out horizontally as opposed to vertically. So you have no choice if you want to get pretty far back and forth to use a helicopter. And they're quite popular. I think Sao Paulo has like 5 times more helicopters than the next per capita than the next biggest helicopter market. And you could a whole metro area. You open all sorts of new possibilities. Of course, there is a cost curve to it, and depending on the market and how expensive these things eventually do become. But yeah, it could definitely change what a city is and what a commute is and what a metro area is defined as, just because the reality of transportation is so much different now.
Okay, so should we start now by looking at some of these concepts to prove that this is not just sort of a fantasy idea that doesn't actually exist?
Yeah, for sure. I want to show you one of my favorites. Okay, Heaviside by Kittyhawk. Kittyhawk actually has a super romantic origin to that name. It's actually the name of the beach where the Wright brothers took their first flight. And this project, Heaviside's been around for a while now, and they have heavy backing by Larry Page, co-founder of Google. So there's big money behind these guys. There's big technical resources and just a lot of effort being thrown into this. From what I can tell, it's probably the most tested, has the most flight hours out of any of these eVTOL programs. And not to mention, it's an actual machine. It's out there flying. It's recorded over 250 takeoffs and landing. And a couple things I want to touch on. First of all is the electric powertrain. So since these are electric motors, the power to weight ratio is like 8 to 10 times higher than that of a conventional turbine or turboprop. Say when you would need a turboprop and a turbine to power a single point of thrust, now you only need a couple of wires and an electric motor. It's way lighter, and you can put way many more of them, right? That means distributed propulsion. The wing gets thrust evenly as opposed to just in two places. This makes for a far more efficient plane. Say, for example, a typical jet airliner would have only 2 turbofans, and that means all of the thrust is coming only in those 2 points of the wing. That not only puts structural pressure on the wing, that means the wing's got to be strong enough to handle that, but that adds weight. You need a stronger wing that is heavier, and you need to lug all that weight around all the time. Not only that, but aerodynamically, the air is far more is more impacted by those 2 uncomfortable points of thrust. Whereas if you spread it out throughout the wing, you disturb the air around the plane way less. And makes for a more efficient and quieter ride.
Oh, wow. So this technology, you said that it's lighter. So that's why we're seeing these planes that have like 6 engines or like 8 engines. I'm using the 8 propellers or 8 fans on board these aircraft because now they're much lighter. Yeah,
it's from the electric point of view, that is one of the biggest selling points. It's distributed propulsion, right? It's pretty much a no-brainer that we don't do with combustion engines, simply because adding more and more engines keeps making it more and more expensive to manufacture and produce. And electric engines being so much lighter per unit thrust means that as you add more of them, the efficiency gains outweigh the weight gains. And if you were to do that with turbines, say, for example, you can tell that airliners are getting more and more efficient, and as they get more efficient, they lose engines. So things like a 777 or a 787 nowadays only have 2 engines, whereas the era of 4-engine planes just proved to be less efficient from a cost perspective, but also aerodynamically.
Well, that's pretty fantastic. So what else is interesting about this Kittyhawk Heaviside concept?
So the other thing would be that because those engines are at the same time so light, and the power delivery method is so different. See, you only need wires as opposed to fuel and air. The engines are now far more flexible. So when the Kittyhawk Heaviside is taking off, you can see it here. All these rotors can be pointed down because the motors can just be pointed down. They're that simple. Try doing that with a turbine. You're gonna have to not only move a big fat turbine that is heavy and has terrible center of gravity and moment of inertia, but now you could do it with a series of light electric motors, and the concept suddenly becomes extremely flexible. You could do crazy things, not just take off vertically, but now you could transition from a hover to a vertical flight almost efficiently. And the attempts have been made to do this uh, with combustion aircraft. Let me find you a good example. One of my favorites, Canadair's CL-84, the Dynavert. It's a lovely example of how the Canadians tried to do this exact same concept, but with turbines. And you see, the problem they ran into was turbines are so uncomfortable because not only do you have to move the heavy turbine and move the heavy wing, but you need the fuel. The fuel pumps still need to work perfectly at different orientations, and the oil. The oil in these engines needs to still flow just as well as it did in one configuration as it did in the other ones.
That's crazy. I can totally see why that like it's just so much easier. These engineers must be like, yeah, it's simple. You just turn the fan the other direction and it just works because it's just electricity.
It is. That's exactly the point. In the fact that there's just such a more simple locomotion element, the motor,
Yep.
that you get all sorts of advantages that aren't necessarily even comparable to a jet engine. They're just completely new. We didn't even know that before electric motors became a thing, we didn't even know how jet engines were coming up short in that regard.
Exactly. And now I also believe that this type of technology is, believe it or not, actually safer than sort of more conventional technology that we've seen in the past. Because it's actually the way that the fans operate is that they can, like if say there was a loss of power or something like that, that they can actually sort of still be useful when the plane is in the sky and it still has that sort of downward velocity.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of redundancy that aviation has been super obsessed with since forever. You know, safety sells airplanes. You wouldn't get on an airliner if the safety record of Boeing and Airbus was similar to that of, say, Ford and Chrysler, right? So you're definitely buying a lot of tickets into the safety department in that you are reducing the risk of combustion heavily and misfires and that kind of thing, engine malfunctions. And from a simple numbers game, more engines, less chance of failure.
Okay, that sounds incredible. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about this project?
Yeah, this will apply to just about everything, but we do have to discuss the gravimetric energy density of batteries versus either grade A kerosene or any other fuel, chemical or otherwise, that we may want to touch on. And the big thing is Kittyhawk is sitting at about 250 to 300 watt hours per kilogram right now.
Yep.
I think that's their latest prototype came in on those figures. And raw kerosene can sit in a tank that weighs nothing compared to the weight of the gasoline, and that's sitting at about 12,000 watt hours per kilogram. So 300 versus 12,000, it's an uphill battle.
That's the problem, because I remember when I went to the Paris Air Show in 2019, probably the last air show that we've had in a while, was that I was in a talk with the, I believe it's the Airbus Innovation Officer, and she mentioned that in no scenario would, say, an Airbus A320 be powered by batteries. You could not find batteries that could hold enough energy in today's world to power such a large aircraft carrying like well over 100 people. So does this mean that these sort of concepts are really only going to be limited to urban environments?
Yeah, see, we touched on the figure about 300 watt hours per kilogram. There have been studies in that batteries have a physical limit to how good they can get, right? We love to think about exponential growth in areas of technology and stuff, but batteries still require a cathode. They require an anode. They require some sort of membrane to pass through all these things. They require enough ions to move up and down and a casing for all this. Physically, studies and experts differ, obviously, on what a theoretically best battery is. But so long as you're storing energy in charged ions, you're pretty much going to have a really hard time going above 1,000 watt hours per kilogram. And just that is about 8 to 9% of what gasoline or what grade A kerosene does. So there's a ceiling. There's this myth that we just have to wait for batteries to get better than gas. And that's just not the case. Physically, the physics of batteries, as long as we're storing energy in what we electrically call a battery, you're not going to get close to 10% of what gasoline does. However, there are a few innovations and a few exponential growth curves that can sort of overcompensate for this or bring light to a different market. For example, we don't know how expensive batteries can get, or cheap, I should say. There's a lot of innovation in the manufacturing side of things that could make batteries way cheaper than gas engines in cars, say than gas engines and gas planes. For example, in cars, we calculated that for the past, say, 10, 20 years, it's getting a lot harder to manufacture cheaper internal combustion engines, whereas an electric car is simply a battery and a motor. You can get as creative as you want from there, and we still only touched the surface of how cheap and how scalable we can get these battery manufacturing plants to be. Tons of efforts going around worldwide trying to make this happen. So eventually we could have, $5,000 electric cars that go 300-400 miles. We don't know where the end of the cost curve is for batteries, and this could extend into eVTOLs and planes. Say maybe they'll never have the range or the payload capacity of a jet, but they'll be way cheaper, and maybe you could buy a couple of them, and maybe the flexibility of their powertrains means they're way more capable and have a completely different repertoire of abilities and mission profiles that a traditional jet just doesn't have access to.
So it's very possible that instead of having like this concept of bigger and bigger planes like we saw with the Airbus A380, with this technology, we might be getting just more sort of more of these eVTOL aircraft. So you would have more frequency rather than bigger capacity.
Yeah, exactly. So the trend in airliners and jet planes in general has been that the bigger you go, the more efficient you get. And that's because while the engines are the fat and heavy part of the traditional combustion plane, the gas is the light part. So the more gas and the less engine relative to total mass of the plane that you can make, the more efficient your design will be. Whereas with electric vehicles, that's completely flipped, turned upside down. It's the more engine you have, the better, and the less energy, the better. So you want to keep your electric planes small, and you want the mass of engines to be the bigger part, just because those are so much lighter and so much more flexible. So the efficiency curve is definitely going in different ways. We don't enjoy the same curve in electric designs that we do in gas designs, because more batteries is not better, whereas more gas is better from an energy efficiency point of view. So electric VTOLs, if we optimize for the energy efficiency of them, they will not get any bigger as long as batteries are involved. And I do have an example brought up where batteries are not necessarily the case, but yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, Tom, is there any other concepts you would like to share with us?
Yeah, that brings us to the second example I wanted to talk about today, and this is Lilium Jet. Lilium Jet recently went public via SPAC. They're valued at over $5 billion, based out of Bavaria, Germany. And I think the coolest thing they do is the fact that they use ducted fans instead of rotors, like Kittyhawk did. And this is a similar analogy to, say, for example, a turboprop to a turbofan, whereas the turbofan has much cleaner airflow, even though higher fuel burn, because the fan operates strictly within the nacelle. This keeps the airflow a lot cleaner, which means you can channel the energy into thrust. You can channel a lot more energy into thrust. All this to say that Lilium is the only company that genuinely say that they're making an electric jet. Everyone else is simply making an electric prop or an electric rotor aircraft.
This looks very cool. This is the flying car. This is the project that I grew up with when the Jetsons would play on the TV, and I was like, where is my flying private car that you see in like every single science fiction movie ever? This is what I've been waiting for. Absolutely.
As a company, they take not just like their engineering, their design super seriously, but they definitely cater to the visuals, the aesthetics. They know it's a product above all. People have to buy these, you know. So from the philosophical customer first perspective, you're not just selling anybody an equation. You're not selling anybody a mileage. You're not selling anybody an energy per passenger kilometer traveled. You're selling a product. And these guys making the first electric jet, making it beautiful, making it look amazing and capable. I mean, they and having it kind of goes to show why their valuation is as it is. And it from the space, they're some of the biggest players around. They have tons of consulting help from not just a bunch of their German colleagues, but a lot of aviation talent in the States has been super interested. Elon Musk has even gone public and saying that he believes Lilium is one of the best electric VTOL designs out there.
So if you could please, could you walk me through this concept? Like, what are we looking in terms of passengers? Do we have an idea about range? Is there any sort of pros and cons that we need to know about?
Yeah, so similar to just about any other electric vertical takeoff and landing concept, we're still married to the idea of batteries. We are only going as far as we can take our batteries. But Lilium has currently a functional prototype, which is a 5-seater, including the pilot. However, their main design, the one you're seeing now, is a 7-seater, and it's basically just a scaled-up model. So what they do is they run their high-voltage lines from the bank of batteries at the bottom of the fuselage, and those will feed all the, I think it's 12 and 18 electric ducted fans in the back. And the electric ducted fans will then pivot according to the mission profile at that point and hover, transition, or cruise. And they do it super efficiently. Keep in mind that efficiency is paramount during cruise, not during hover. So if you can hover inefficiently but cruise efficiently, then your transport missions will make far better use of their energy. Think about it. If you're only hovering during takeoff and landing, but you're cruising for an hour or two, then you definitely want to optimize for cruise. And the smaller frontal area of the bank of ducted fans compared to rotors means it's far more efficient in cruise. And so that's why I love Lilium. That's why I think that from an eVTOL transport point of view, these guys just have the best value proposition. Because keep in mind, they're also electric jets. So they're going to go way faster and way more efficient than electric rotors or props.
This is just so cool. So it has a range of around about... Oh, sorry. So this concept is so cool. It has a range of around about 250 kilometers or 155 sort of miles, and a speed of 280 kilometers per hour or 175 miles per hour. So that's already kind of like 3 times the speed of a car, but it is sort of lacking in range. It's not going to really be able to go too far, but I mean, that's some... If you're a rich person and you've got a house like outside of a city, like a country estate, that's going to be like cut down your time to like just half an hour to get out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a city on Earth that you can't hop across in one of these with 250 kilometers of range. You know, you could do it a couple times even.
So is that what this one's designed for? That this aircraft is designed for like city, like within a city hopping around, or is it designed to go between like city pairs?
I think more so than specifying a mission profile up front, they're more interested in proposing a wide range of profiles. So yeah, you could perform hover missions in this kind of thing if you want to do that in the morning and then fly back all the way home with the rest of your battery. For say you could say 10 kilometers for hovering around the city to run errands and then run back home or run to the countryside or hop over to the next city. It's about that flexibility and how you have this way wider range of mission profiles than you would with a jet or a helicopter. The eVTOL is just far more flexible. And there's also something I want to draw attention to here. You see when they're specifying their maximum physical range, you'll see that in parentheses it says miles service range plus reserves. The reserves is a careful topic with electric aircraft because normally with gas aircraft you would simply have an hour or two depending on what kind of flight and what kind of regulations were present for that mission profile. You can't just slap on an extra hour's worth of flight with batteries. The airplane, it wouldn't take off, right? It's just you're shooting yourself in the foot by forcing yourself to carry around more energy than you're ever going to use. Fortunately, much like electric cars brake regeneratively and they draw back the energy of their motion as they're braking by running the motors in reverse, you could do a lot of that same stuff with electric ducted fans or electric rotors. Say if you're running them backwards as the airplane is falling or as you're slowing down through the air, you can see that not only would you not expend energy to either slow down or land, you would actually get some of it back. So in the case of an emergency, your rotors could be spinning backwards or your fans could be spinning backwards and you'd be marginally recharging the energy. So how much do you need in reserve power? Arguably none. You know, as you're just falling and slowing down, you could regenerate whatever power you need to land safely wherever. And so it's a different dynamic that is much needed in the sense that reserve energy is hard to come by when you're relying on batteries.
That's crazy. So this, I'm like making sweeping statements here. So you can just correct me if I'm wrong. But you're telling me that this thing could like recharge in the air. Like if it switches its things the other way around, the wind energy then goes back into the battery.
Of course, it's a much less efficient process than on the way forward. Say energy from the battery to the propellers to motion, it's far more efficient than motion to propellers to batteries. But it's not to say that you can't regenerate at least some of that energy. And when you're flying, you're so high up, you have all that energy of gravity. You have the energy, you have the potential energy of gravity. So as you're falling down and slowing down, you have so much energy to draw from. You maybe don't even need it to be that efficient. You just need on your way down, you just need to recover enough energy that'll let you land safely. And as you're losing energy and speed, I mean, it just gets safer and safer and easier. So it's a different mechanic, completely different dynamic of how it works. And reserve fuel and reserve energy, well, it's still a topic of discussion among regulators and even among engineers themselves. We definitely do have a different paradigm to look at because it doesn't mean the same thing that it would mean on a traditional combustion plane.
Okay, so the one question that I know that I want to know, and perhaps everybody else who's watching this, when can I get my hands on this aircraft?
Right, that is a big question because it's about the unknown unknowns. A lot of these guys, they're sitting on billions of dollars, and for example, Lilium has gone public. They're under ticker symbol QELL, currently trading in New York. But there's regulatory hurdles. We don't know what these regulators. We just touched on a small topic, which is the reserve energy requirements. We still don't know what this will mean for, say, are we just going to have eVTOLs land on helipads and come up and down? Can we land them on rooftops now that they're quiet and they don't make as much noise as helicopters? They're big questions, engineering-wise, and also from a product market fit point of view. You're gonna have to round up enough people to buy these. That means people who have the money for them and the use case, willing and able. It'll take time and it'll take a marketing effort, not just an engineering effort, but an administrative and a marketing effort to get these things out in the market and competing for the customers' dollars.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a disappointing one. That's reality. But maybe if they're watching, if Lilium is watching us here today, perhaps they can invite us to come and go for a ride in their raw prototype that they've got hidden away in a warehouse somewhere.
Their 5-seater is operational. So they've done hover, they've done transition, and they do cruise. They've got
a 5-seater prototype already going.
Yep, it's up and running. Loosely defined, but yeah, it has performed hover, it has performed transition, and it performs cruise.
God damn, I'm ready. I'm ready to roll this out.
With the electric ducted fans. If they want to come on the podcast, Lilium, you guys are always welcome, of course.
We'll have to send out an invite further down the line when this story is a little bit more developed.
And there's one last example that I wanted to touch on shortly here, and that would be Jetoptera's J2000 prototype. What we have here is a brand new propulsion system. So whereas the past two examples that we touched on both used electric motors and some form of a rotor or fan powered by batteries, this is a brand new propulsion system. And it's energy independent, interestingly enough. So it could be powered by a combustion turbine, it could be powered by a nuclear reactor, and it could be powered by batteries. What this is just four thrusters being fed compressed air, and they work like Dyson fans. So the thrust is coming exclusively from the compressed air, and the energy of the powertrain could be from anywhere. So if you want to find out more about this, you can tune into the next week's episode where we discuss the future of not eVTOLs, but simply brand new propulsion systems and how they can change the landscape of aviation and aerial infrastructure.
Wow, so this is a completely different concept from the prop sort of fan that we had before, and then the mini electric turbines that we had before.
Yeah, exactly. So the locomotion, it's not from electric motors at all. The way it would work electrically would be a bank of batteries powering an electric air pump, and that electric air pump would then feed the compressed air to the thrusters. So it is a design that is compatible with electric powertrains. It's just not married to the idea of electric powertrains. It's what they call energy independent.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds like an absolute game changer sort of for the industry. And it's something that I really look forward to talk about in perhaps its own whole episode, because I think this type of innovation in engine technology, a lot of people have been asking for me to talk about sort of the evolution of engines and what's next in the world of engines. And I think that's something that deserves its own episode.
Right, because if you think about like the history of aviation, how long have we been messing around with turbines? It's been forever. We haven't been able to let go of the turbofan or the turboprop design forever. And so then the next step, be it a true development or maybe just an incremental efficiency improvement, it definitely has some interesting stuff down the pipeline.
Okay, well, so now a lot of you who have been watching so far may remember that at the beginning I said that I was going to show you something sort of secret, maybe a sneak peek to something that's on my main channel, and it's actually something that ties in very nicely into the topic that we've been doing here today. So what I'm going to introduce you is a concept, and you have to excuse my kind of rubbish 3D skills here. This was a concept jet airliner that was designed by Hawker Siddeley in the 1970s that would have been a VTOL airliner that would carry up to 119 passengers. So you can see here, it would actually have 16 it would have 8 on each side of these jets. There would be, I believe, turbofan jets that would allow it to take off vertically, and then it would use the normal sort of turbojets here on the side to fly horizontally once it took off. And this was done under a special sort of report by the British government. They were looking for a new aircraft design that would allow aircraft to land at city airports, because back then building a huge new airport was very expensive, and so they were looking for something that could do this without kind of trying to do a shortcut without having to build like a whole new airport, especially around London, which today London has, I believe, 6 different airports. So this concept design was definitely taking what we've been talking about to the nth degree, using crazy 1960s, 1970s technology. Tom, this is the first time you're seeing this, and I just wanted to get your sort of thoughts about this design that they came up with.
First of all, I think it looks amazing from an aesthetic point of view. I think I probably drew something that I wanted to look like this when I was maybe 6 years old. But yeah, it does a great job to illustrate the problems with vertical takeoff. See what 16 lift jets would do to the mass of this plane, and not just during takeoff and landing, but throughout cruise. You'd have to lug those things around, and the energy and the oil and all these support systems throughout the flight.
I believe statistically,
how much they would actually push.
It was, sorry, not to interrupt, but it was actually, I believe, 15 to 20% of the total weight were these engines.
There you go, and that's not even counting the fuel to power them throughout.
And this is the real kicker. It was 35% of the cost of the plane was just these engines. So you're talking about a plane that is not as fuel efficient as a regular aircraft, and cost like significantly more, could only carry 100 passengers, and had Like, you're thinking about the 1960s, 1970s, they didn't have the computer technology we have today. You couldn't just plug in an autopilot to manage all of these different things. It would have had to be the most sophisticated computer technology of the era to manage what would be 16 VTOL engines and 2 normal engines, all the different thrusts that we were talking about. So it was definitely ambitious, but you can kind of see why the project never went ahead in 1973. But for those people that are watching sort of my main channel, you're going to have to wait to see this video in all its glory in the next few weeks when it comes out.
Yeah, you could definitely see how it was designed as such, though. And thinking about how the concepts are made to sell the project, it definitely looks amazing. My hat comes off to the designers. So everybody, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. We'd really appreciate a like and a subscribe on this video. We're going to push out weekly podcasts from now on. We really appreciate all the eyes on this video.
And if you have any ideas for yourself, what you want to, what topic we should cover, I know Tom, just his knowledge is infinite, so he knows so much about anything, then let us know down in the comments below, and we'll definitely start to do some voting and some polls to decide which topic of the whole world of aviation and perhaps other machines as well that we can cover. It's something else just before we finish up today that I wanted to say. You might have noticed that we haven't actually referred to what this podcast is called because we haven't actually come up with a name yet. So if you have an idea for a name, definitely write something down in the comments below and we can do our own sort of contest to come up with something. So, because at the moment it's just like untitled aviation podcast at the time of the recording anyway.
Should be good.
All right. Thank you so much for watching.